know, it's the first Friday in February, which means it's time for the next installment in our 2022 Totally Tunisian calendar blanket. And this month we are going to learn the Tunisian Full Stitch. The Full Stitch uses the Tunisian Simple Stitch on the reverse pass. It's something we learned last month, but depending on where you place your hook and pull up a loop, you get a very different looking fabric. One of the things we get asked a lot here when we do a calendar blanket usually comes down to sizing. So I want to take a moment here in February just to remind everybody that yarn and tension and stitch patterns vary. So the size of your overall square is going to vary throughout the year as well. So here are a few things to keep in mind. One, if you feel your tension is just too tight, go up a hook size. It's perfectly okay and it won't hurt anything. If you feel your tension is too loose, then go down a hook size. That's also perfectly all right and won't hurt anything. When you get to the end of your square, some squares might burrito or roll a little bit more than others. Also not a problem. This is something you can work out with blocking. So when you see this video, you'll notice how much my square curls towards the end of the project before I put on the border. And obviously I've blocked it. When you're blocking your square, and you can use steam blocking or wet blocking, however you're comfortable, you can stretch the square to shape it. You can make it a little taller. Do not pull it sideways if it's already wide enough. And don't worry too much about the overall size or shape of your squares. The most important thing is that all of your squares have the same stitch count and the same row count. That way, everything will work out nice and easy at the end. Just like our MMAM calendar blanket last year, some of the strips were short, some of them were tall, but everything worked out when we joined them. And after you join your squares, you can block your blanket again. So don't worry, there is plenty of ways to fix curling or tension or any of the things that come along during the course of this project. So don't sweat the tension, just enjoy the stitch. If you are interested in a written copy of today's pattern or any of the patterns that have to do with our crochet calendar blanket projects, you'll find them all for sale in our Etsy shop. We'll link to our Etsy shop in the description box down below, and we thank you very, very much for your support of our show. That said, let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up the Tunisian Full Stitch together.
For our Tunisian Full Stitch square, I'm using a 5.5mm Afghan hook and a 5.5mm regular crochet hook. This is for the border. This is optional. You don't have to have the regular crochet hook because you can complete the entire project with just the Tunisian hook. 5.5mm is also known as an I or a 9 in the US, possibly a 5 in the UK if you have old hooks. You're going to want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. You might find a stitch marker or a clip helps keep track of your 2 pattern rows because this pattern does repeat, little 2 rows back and forth. And you're going to want 100 yards of yarn in total. I'm using a size 4 medium weight acrylic. You want around 90 yards for your main square color and about 10 yards for your border. And once you've got all that together, we can get started.
Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below.
The Tunisian Full Stitch gets its appearance by where you put your hook to pull up a loop. So on the reverse pass, we'll still be using the Tunisian Simple Stitch technique we learned last month, but the forward pass is where things change up a little bit. It's really easy to count your rows. You just look for the stitches that kind of sit diagonal to each other. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can see that I've worked 6 rows of the Tunisian Full Stitch over a 6 loop base. So if you want to work yourself a little sampler before you dive into the whole thing, that's what my little 6x6 sampler looks like. And that's the full stitch. We're going to begin with a slip knot. And we're starting off with our Afghan hooks. We're going to chain 38 to begin. This square begins exactly the same way as our previous Tunisian Simple Stitch square did. So if you've got 38 chains to start, or whatever even number you're starting with, especially if you're going to do a little sampler to start, we skip the first chain from the hook. That chain is already represented by this loop that's on our hook. We insert our hook into the next chain and pull up a loop. Insert our hook into the next chain and pull up a loop. Insert our hook into the next chain and pull up a loop. And you're going to pull up a loop in each of those 38 chains, or I should say remaining 37 chains, all the way across. At the end of the forward pass of row 1 of the full stitch pattern, we will have 38 loops on our hook, or the exact same number of loops as you had in your foundation chain row. At the end of your forward pass, you should have a squiggly little worm of yarn kind of wrapping itself around your Afghan hook. You can just smooth it out along the length of your hook and count up your loops. If you started with 38 chains like I did, you should have 38 loops on your hook. The first forward pass is the same as the previous month, and the first reverse pass is the same as the previous month as well. We are using the Tunisian Simple Stitch on the reverse pass for this square pattern, so that is always going to look the same. It begins by yarn over hook and pull back through one loop only. That creates the chain stitch that runs up this side of our square. So every reverse pass is yarn over, pull back through one loop, and that's how it starts. Everything else is yarn over, pull back through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull back through 2. It's the Tunisian Simple Stitch worked all the way back. Once you finish yarn over and pull back through 2, or the Tunisian Simple Stitch, you'll be left again with 1 loop on your hook. So that's a complete forward pass and reverse pass. That is row 1 of the Tunisian full stitch completed. It looks exactly like the Tunisian Simple Stitch because that's exactly what it is. And here is where we pick up the full stitch. Row 2, or every even row of the pattern, begins by skipping not just the first vertical bar, but the second vertical bar too. So you're going to skip right over that second vertical bar, and you're going to slip your hook in the space, so underneath this little stitch that runs horizontal and in between the 2 vertical bars. If you pull it apart, you should be able to see that space. You're going to slip your hook right through that space and pull up a loop, and right through the next space and pull up a loop, and right through the next space and pull up a loop. And you're going to insert your hook between the vertical bars right through the fabric and pick up a loop on your hook all the way across. And try to keep your tension loose. We don't want to work tightly because it does make it difficult to maneuver those loops on your hook. It makes it difficult to get your hook through the fabric. So if you do have trouble with tension, you find that things are just a little too tight, then I recommend going up a hook size because that will help. As you near the end of a row 2, you'll insert your hook through the last space between the vertical bars, and if you count them up, you'll be 1 loop short. So we should have 38 loops on our hook. If you count them up, you'll have only 37 because on a row 2, we need to pick up an extra loop on the end of the row. So we're not using the vertical bar, although you could if you want, if you can't find it, but I like to use the little loop that sits just behind it. So you can use the vertical bar at the end, or you can twist it a little and just use the loop behind. And what you're doing is just picking up a loop in that space. That will make it an even 38 stitches. And if you're new to Tunisian and you're not sure you got them all, make sure you just even everything out, give it a quick count. And once you're sure that you've got 38 loops, we Tunisian Simple Stitch all the way back. So yarn over, pull back through 1 loop only, that's how we start, and then yarn over and pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2. Tunisian Simple Stitch all the way back, the reverse pass. At the end of your reverse pass of row 2, you can really start to see that full stitch taking shape. So the vertical bars will always sit in between the vertical bars of the previous row. And you can really see that here. So that was row 2. Row 3 is the other part of this pattern. It's exactly the same as row 2, we just change where we start. So for row 2, because you're skipping the first and second vertical bars, for row 3, you're only skipping the first vertical bar. So you're slipping your hook in that space between the first 2 vertical bars of the row, and then you're just slipping your hook in between the vertical bars right through the fabric, right through that little space that sits there. You can always sort of pull it apart and see it. So there it is there. 2 vertical bars, there's a space in between. And you're going to stick your hook between the vertical bars all the way through the fabric, pick up a loop all the way across. We do not have to pick up a loop on the end. Our last loop will be picked up between the last 2 vertical bars in this row. And you should still have 38 stitches or 38 loops on your hook. At the end of your forward pass, you'll have this cute little worm wrapped around your needle or your hook. Your last loop will be picked up between the last 2 vertical bars of the row, and you can see them here. Vertical bar, vertical bar. Count them up. If you're not sure, make sure you have 38 loops, and we Tunisian simple stitch all the way back. Yarn over, back through the first loop only. Again, we want that running chain stitch all the way up the side of our square. Yarn over, pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2. And here we go, all the way back. That is the end of the reverse pass of row 3, and you can easily see your rows by counting up on the diagonal. So here's row 1 down at the bottom. Row 2 those vertical bars sit in between the vertical bars of the previous row, and then on another diagonal, row 3, it sits in between the vertical bars of the row previous to that as well. 1, 2, 3. So it's easy to keep track of what row you're on. You've completed row 3, 1, 2, 3. You can always count. Or if you want to speed things up, this is where you might want to use your stitch marker or your clip. You can mark the previous row 2 or the previous even row so that you know when you get all the way across, it reminds you, oh yeah, I've got to pick up a loop at the very end. So just to remind you, row 2, so every even row, you skip the first and the second vertical bars. 1, 2. And then you start by picking up a loop in between vertical bar 2 and 3. On the odd rows, or the row 3, you skip the first vertical bar only, and you start by picking up a loop between vertical bars 1 and 2. At the end of a row 2 forward pass, you have to pick up an extra loop at the end. So you can use that vertical bar at the end if you want, or you can reach just behind it, grab that loop that sits just behind it. I like to do that. I feel like it helps create a more even flat edge along this side of my square. And I'll show you what that looks like again when I get over there. I'm just nearing at the end of a forward pass on an even row. I've got my little curling worm here. I picked up my last loop, or my second last loop I should say, between the last 2 vertical bars. If I count them up, I'll be 1 short. I'll have only 37 loops. So at the end of every even row, you want to pick up a loop either in that last vertical bar or reach behind it. I like to reach behind it. So I just pull that vertical bar out of the way and I pick up the loop that sits just behind it. And that's where I get loop number 38. I smooth out my little yarn worm here, count up my loops, make sure I've got 38. And then I start the Tunisian simple stitch all over again. Yarn over, pull back through only 1 loop to start, and then yarn over, pull back through 2, all the way back. That's the reverse pass of row 4 completed, or the reverse pass of an even row. Again, it's easy to count. If you forget where you are, start at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've completed 4 rows. That means row 5 is an odd row. Every odd row starts by picking up a loop in the space between the first 2 vertical bars. So I reach my hook through that first space, pick up a loop, and I pick up a loop in between the vertical bars all the way across. And my last loop is picked up between the last two vertical bars, so there's no need to do anything extra special at the end. It's only on the even rows or the row 2 where you have to pick up an extra loop to make sure you've got 38 at the very end of the row. And then the reverse pass for every row is just the Tunisian Simple Stitch. But what you end up getting is this really full looking appearance to your fabric, and you've got your vertical bars from every other row sitting in between the vertical bars of the row before. It's such a neat effect. It also doesn't curl as much as some of the other Tunisian stitches. It's got a nice thick warm feel to it. And I think it feels easier just sort of plunking your hook right through the fabric as opposed to trying to pick up a loop in a bar or in a stitch. Anyway, I'm going to turn you loose. You can repeat the even odd rows, or row 2 and row 3, all the way up. Remember, every single row of Tunisian crochet consists of a forward pass and a reverse pass. So forward pass plus reverse pass equals 1 full row of stitches. And we're going to do 32 rows in total of the Tunisian full stitch pattern. I have finished 32 rows of the Tunisian full stitch, and here's my little burrito. It curls, but I feel not quite as badly as the Tunisian Simple Stitch does, but maybe that's just me. So you'll probably notice, as I mentioned in the intro, that this is a different tension, a different stitch, so your square might not immediately look like it's as tall as it is wide. Mine certainly doesn't, but this pattern has some stretch, and once you have it blocked out, that's why blocking is important. You can block out your square to suit the size that you need. So shaping is how, I should say, we get shaping when we block. So as long as you have the right row count, 32 rows, as long as you have the right stitch count, 38 across, don't worry, all of your squares will match up. And I feel I need to say that regularly because I get a lot of questions about that. This is a stretchy sort of fabric. So once you've completed your last reverse pass, you can fasten off. Take a moment to weave in your tail, and then you can switch to your regular crochet hook so we can add ourselves a little border. We're going to take our border color, we're going to start with a slip knot. And I've switched back to my regular crochet hook, still a 5.5 millimeter, because now we're going to do regular single crochet all the way around the edge of our square. So I'm going to grab my little burrito here. I'm going to join my yarn with a single crochet in that first vertical bar of row 32. So that's the last row of Tunisian full stitch we did. It's the first bar right on the edge, and I'm going to join with a single crochet. So yarn over and pull back through 2, little single crochet. Okay, much like the Tunisian Simple Stitch square, we are going to single crochet using all of the vertical front bars across row 32 all the way across. So you're just going to single crochet into the vertical bars. There'll be 38 of them all the way across. I'm just working over top of my short tail. And our top row has kind of a neat little slightly twisted single crochet because they lean a little bit, having been worked into the top of those vertical bars. So we're working the vertical bars, that's these guys right here. Slip your hook through it and single crochet as normal, and I'll catch up with you at the end. As you get across the top of the last row and you get to the last vertical bar, it sits over here on the edge. So that's number 38 right there on the edge. Single crochet into that. You'll have 38 single crochet all the way across the top of your burrito. Chain 1 and single crochet into the same vertical bar. This is our little corner. And now we're going to single crochet down the edge of those 32 squares. So I want you to keep in mind that every other row there's a really obvious, easy to see edge stitch, and in between there's a little tiny one that kind of sits just a bit below, a little bit to the back. So don't miss those stitches. You're just going to single crochet, you're just grabbing the loops, So it's, once you get the little pattern going, it's pretty easy to see. There's the loop that sits up and the loop that sits down. So it looks almost like it's sitting in a little valley. The loop that sits up, it's obvious, it's bigger, it's easy to see. And the one that sits down below those two easier to see bumps. You're going to want to make sure you've got 32 stitches all the way down. We'll have 33 by the time we get to the foundation row, but you'll have 32 stitches, one for each of those Tunisian full stitch rows. And of course, this is easy to count, 2, 4, 6, 8. So the big ones that sit on top are the every other rows. Don't forget the little guys in between. There'll be 2 little ones in between. And I'll catch up with you down at the bottom. That's 32 single crochet worked down the side of our square. The first one is the single crochet, chain 1 single crochet. So don't forget to count that single crochet that's part of that corner. That's number 1. Number 32 is all the way down on row 1 of the full stitch, and then we've got our foundation row down here. So into the foundation row we're going to work our 33rd chain. So there's 33 single crochets down each side because we are working across the foundation row. So single crochet into that first foundation chain, your little tail will be sitting there. Chain 1 and single crochet in the same place. And easy peasy, single crochet in each of those foundation chains all the way across. You'll have 38 single crochet across the bottom of your square. Your last single crochet across your foundation row is worked into the last foundation stitch or chain at the bottom there. That's 38 across, chain 1 and single crochet in the same place. That turns our little corner, and that's the foundation chain row. It's separate from the rest of the row edges going up the other side, and now we're looking for the front vertical bar that sits at the beginning of each row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Some of them might be a little tight or hard to see, but just turn it sideways if you have to and look for that obvious chain stitch that runs up the front. You're working your single crochets into the front bar, the vertical bar, the front loop of that running chain stitch. And it looks something like this. So grab that front loop, single crochet, front loop, single crochet, front loop, and some of them might be bigger, some of them might be smaller than others. There might be a little extra space sometimes not much space. It's just the nature of that stitch. So just make sure you've got 32 running up the side. So it'll be 33 altogether. So the one that's part of the corner down here, that's 1. And then 32 all the way up to the edge, and 33 will be in the same front vertical bar that we started the row in. So 33 single crochet up each side in total, because we've got that foundation row that we're using. And just work away. I'll catch up with you at the top. My last single crochet is worked into the same vertical bar that we began in. So that's number 33. Chain 1 and join with a slip stitch to that first single crochet we made, and that finishes off our little border edge. You can fasten off. Take a moment and weave in that tail. And then I recommend blocking. I will steam block my square. I'm going to stretch it lengthwise, or I should say up and down, as I go, and not left to right, because I want to size my square up. When you're steam blocking, remember to do it from the back side, so you kind of unroll it so that it kind of wants to curl itself into the towel or the ironing board or whatever it is you're blocking on. It helps to block it upside down, and leave it that way to dry completely, at least 24 hours. And there we go, all nice and blocked. Now, it still might be, even if you've blocked yours, a little bit shorter than it is wide. That's okay, as long as your stitch count and as long as your row count matches all your other squares, everything is gonna work out sunny when we put all of our squares together. That is such a cool stitch.
And that is the Tunisian Full Stitch. Absolutely love it. Very different feel from the Tunisian Simple Stitch. Bit of a thicker fabric. Great for hats, great for blankets, great for sweaters, and great for dishcloths. Why not try a smaller version of this square with cotton and get busy in the sink? We hope you enjoyed the February installment to our 2022 Totally Tunisian Calendar Blanket, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda InStitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye guys.
Hi everybody, Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.